Tired of paying 10%, 15%, or more to sell your cards, comics, and digital collectibles? How does 1% sound? Too good to be true? Well, not anymore. MySlabs.com is the web's premier user-driven marketplace for buying and selling slabbed cards, sealed wax, and now, slabbed comics and digital collectibles. So the next time you're forced to pay 10% or more to sell something from your collection, head over to MySlabs.com and join the 1% revolution.
Regie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. It has been some time since I did one of these vlog style videos in which I pontificate out loud on a specific topic, but I was inspired to talk about this topic based upon an interview that I just did yesterday for a podcast. And it was during this interview that the podcaster made a comment about the mindset of comic book collectors that triggered something in my mind. And the person said something to the effect of, we as comic book collectors are very much focused on instant gratification, right? Buying that next thing that gives us the next high. And as soon as you experience that high, you go chasing the next high. And this is actually something that I've spoken about previously on the channel, about the importance of taking the time to smell the roses and appreciate what it is that you've accomplished. But this person made this comment during the interview, and it immediately sparked a thought. It caused me to think about something that is written across the room on my whiteboard. It prompted me to think about that phrase that I wrote many months ago. And the whiteboard is oftentimes used to capture thoughts for videos, random thoughts that I will have. I will jot them down on the board, and then eventually many of the ideas that are on that board will become videos in some form or fashion. And with this one, I had not created a video. I had not created anything from this phrasing that was written on the board. But during the interview, during the podcast, it sparked that thought, and I started to think about what was written on the board, and I decided to kind of run with the idea, which is why I'm recording this segment right now, kind of sort of early morning. But what I have written on the board is that happiness isn't in the next box. That is essentially the phrasing that is written on the box. And how I connected the dots was that the interviewer spoke about how we as comic book collectors are very much focused on instant gratification, focusing on chasing the high, if you will. And the high doesn't last, which means that you're constantly chasing the next thing. And I started to think about how that's true, how we will order things on eBay and forget about what it is that we ordered, or we will order things on whatever website and forget what those things are, because we're constantly on the hunt, right? We always talk about the hunt. The hunt is where the magic is. The hunt is the exciting part, which is true. The challenge is that happiness doesn't necessarily come from that box that shows up. It kind of sort of comes from the hunt. But to stretch it out to a larger thought, in many ways, we as collectors are very much focused on what we don't have. Think about it. We are very much focused on what we don't have. We create want list and wish list in which we identify comics or collectibles that we actually want to go after, that we want to be on the hunt for. We dedicate actual lists to the things that we don't have. And then we reference those things over and over and over again. We essentially focus on what we don't have. What we aren't doing is focusing on the things that are actually in our possession. We as collectors focus on the high dollar of comic book collectibles. Comics are too expensive. I'll never afford that comic. I will never be able to get that comic. That won't happen for me. Good for you that you got that book, but I won't be able to get that. I can't get my Grail comic. We spend so much energy and effort focusing on the things that we don't have that we forget to enjoy the things that are actually in our possession. We forget to celebrate what we own. We forget to celebrate the things that are sitting in the boxes, probably to your left or to your right at this very moment as you listen to me. We forget to celebrate and enjoy what it is that we already have because we're so focused on the thing that we don't have and or the thing that we will never get. Why? Why do we do that? Why don't we take time to appreciate what we own? Why are we always on the hunt looking for the next thing? Because we assume maybe that happiness will be in the next box, but happiness does not come from the next box. Happiness comes from, to some degree or another, being content with what you have. Not necessarily satisfied. You shouldn't necessarily be satisfied, but you should be content with the things that you have because you probably have some really awesome stuff. And if you compare the stuff that you owned to the stuff that somebody else owns, they would probably covet what it is that you have. You know what I'm saying? Everybody, to some degree or another, focuses on somebody else instead of, again, appreciating what it is that we have in our possession. And the truth is that we actually have a lot. The reality is that we can actually afford way more stuff than what we can't afford. We probably have way more stuff in our collection that if we only slowed down and enjoyed that would potentially bring us a whole lot more happiness than focusing on the things that we don't necessarily have or that we won't be able to get. And that is a little bit of a struggle for us as collectors because, again, we focus on what we don't have. We focus on we have to get more. We have to get more. We have to get more expensive things. We have to have more comics in our collection. Maybe that's not the answer. Maybe more isn't the answer. And I'm saying this as a guy with a massive collection, right? Right? But if you think about it, one of the trends that we are seeing in the comic book community right now is that a lot of people are actually divesting themselves of their collection. They're whittling things down. And I think it's a wonderful thing where people have said, you know what? True happiness for me is 100 books. True happiness for me is under 500 books or whatever it is. I think that's a wonderful thing because in my head, people have maybe come to the realization that more isn't better, that there is a certain amount of stuff that they have access to that truly brings them happiness. And this isn't to say that you should aim for reducing your collection. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that you have to find where happiness actually exists for you. And sometimes happiness will be with the things that you already possess. And maybe it puts you in a position to not buy as much. Maybe it puts you in a position to divest yourself of some things. But the goal, I think, is to ultimately be happy. I have a buddy that I think suffers from occasional bouts of depression. And I've never actually spoken to him about it because, as I've said before on the channel, there are certain things that make me uncomfortable to talk about. And this is one of those things. But my buddy, who is a wonderful, wonderful person and a very good friend, has these bouts in which he goes on shopping sprees and buys a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff. And I'm not talking about collectibles. I'm just talking about stuff in general. Like, 1,000 cases of water. Like, water's not going anywhere. Why do we need 1,000 cases of water, right? I mean, that's an extreme example, but not too far off. But he buys this stuff because he needs to feel something. He wants to feel happy, and he feels the void, if you will, the unhappiness that he feels with stuff. And it doesn't matter what that stuff is. But you ask him why. Why'd you do that? He gives you all the reasons in the world as to why he did it. And in his mind, it makes perfect sense. But as you listen to it, you're like, that doesn't make sense at all. Like, that makes no sense. It's because he's searching for something to fill a void. And water or toilet paper or waffle makers happen to fill that void in his mind. But the reality is that it doesn't. The void still exists. And it gives him a temporary moment of satisfaction until it doesn't, and then he goes and he buys something else. And this is a really wonderful way, I think, to not be happy because you're not asking yourself the tough questions. You're filling the void with something else instead of addressing what is the actual issue that you are experiencing. But it's tough. It is tough, I think, to ask yourself really tough questions, to look inside and to ask yourself, what is it that motivates me to do the things that I do? And comic book collecting is one of those things that if we're not careful, we will put ourselves potentially in a bad spot because we're chasing the next thing. We're expecting that next thing to bring us the happiness that we seek. Maybe happiness comes from just reading the comics and not necessarily buying them. Maybe happiness comes from being, again, content with what we have, not necessarily satisfied. And I say that because I don't know that you should become satisfied, because in my mind, being satisfied means complacent. And that's, I'm not a fan of complacency. I'm a fan of people striving for more, aiming for more, and hopefully getting more, but in a way that actually makes sense, in a way that is supported by a larger objective, in a way that is logical. I'm a huge fan of that. But spending and buying just because, that's where I struggle, right? So again, this is just something that was on my mind technically for a long period of time, but was exacerbated, if you will, by this interview that I just did yesterday. And it's been a long time since I've done this type of a format, but I do enjoy this. And so this was just something that I wanted to kind of get off the whiteboard, get it out of my head and get it out there. As always, my hope is that when I create content, whatever that content is, it might actually help someone out there make sense of comic book collecting, because that is, after all, the goal of the channel. And maybe what I just said over the last few minutes has resonated with you. And if so, I encourage you to hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment behind. Let me know, because I am interested in how the content that I create actually lands on people. And if this was a complete miss, I want to know that as well. That helps me. It helps me to grow as a content provider. As always, if you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.